Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book. And before I get us into our event tonight, I just wanted to make a couple of quick announcements and let you guys know what's going on at the store. So next week is Thanksgiving. So we will close at 4 on Wednesday and we'll be closed on Thursday, reopen on Friday, and on the 27th, we're going to be doing our Murder by the Book Recommends, which is going to be our first in-store event that we've done since March of 2020. So if you guys have missed any of those, basically what it is the staff just kind of talking about some of our favorite books of the year. We'll also be talking about some good gift ideas as well. We'll be do that at 11 and 1 o'clock on the 27th. It'll be the same talk at both. So if you can't make one or the other, we'll be talking about the same books at both of them. And we're super excited to announce finally for the first time since the pandemic has started, starting on Sunday, November 28th, we will be open on Sundays again. We'll be open from noon to 5. So we hope that you will come visit Sally and Brenda on Sundays and make them feel like they're there for a reason. It's been a long time since we've been open on Sundays, and this feels like a nice big step to kind of getting things a little bit back to normal for us. Also wanted to mention, if you have not checked out the January and February event calendars, we're starting to book some in-store stuff with authors, obviously pending, COVID cases and things like that. So, everything changes so often. We're hopefully optimistic that we'll be able to get some authors in store in January. So when you're checking out the calendar, you will see events either listed as in-store or virtual. So definitely check that out. Also wanted to mention tonight, we're super excited. We're partnering with Novel Suspects for this event. They helped us get it set up. If you are not familiar with them, Novel Suspects is a community of mystery and thriller fans, readers, authors, editors, and publishers who love to share their favorite books, movies, TV shows, and podcasts, and pretty much anything kind of mystery related. Their goal is to have as much fun as possible while talking about murder. You'll find book lists, series features, quizzes, videos, exclusive excerpts, and audio essays, as well as reviews. And it's all intended to deepen your appreciation for the mystery and thriller genres, whether you love legal thrillers, hard-boiled detective stories, psychological suspense, or just a good old-fashioned cozy. So I will drop a link to their website, which is novelsuspects.com, in the comments once we get started. So I hope that you guys will check them out. They're a great group, and we've been really lucky to be able to get to partner with them for some of these virtual events. We're super excited tonight to have Kathleen Kent with us to celebrate the release of The Pledge. And of course, we're always happy to get to chat with Hank Phillippi Ryan, whose most recent book, Her Perfect Life, came out a little bit earlier in the fall. But to get us started, I'm going to bring Kathleen out. How are you tonight, Kathleen?
Hi, I'm doing great. It's good to see you, John. And it's so good to be in, even if it's virtually, to be with Murder by the Book tonight.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we got to do this. I think was the last time that we had you at the store, was that the joint event with Joe Lansdale?
Yes, it was. It was
So
several years ago, and I remember that was a lot of fun. Joe's always fun to appear with.
Yeah, so we're all big fans of the Detective Betty series, and we're super excited that The Pledge is here. It just came out on Tuesday. So for those of you who might not know Kathleen, she is the author of the Edgar-nominated The Dime and the Burn, as well as 3 best-selling historical novels, The Heretic's Daughter, The Traitor's Wife, and The Outcast. And she lives in Dallas. Next up, we're going to bring out Hank Phillippi Ryan. How are you tonight, Hank?
I'm great. How are you all?
Good. It's so good to see you.
I'm from Boston. So it's a different time zone. I always think that that's so much fun. Mm-hmm. So thank you for inviting me. This is great. I'm a huge fan of Kathleen. Yay. I love this book. So I'm very grateful to be able to talk with you all tonight.
Perfect. So as I mentioned, Hank's most recent book, Her Perfect Life, came out in September, and we did a really great chat with her and Robin Harding. So once we get started, I'll also drop a link to that YouTube video if you guys want to check that out and hear her talk a little bit more about that. And so Hank's official bio, USA Today bestselling author Hank Phillippi Ryan has won 5 Agatha Awards, in addition to Anthony, Macavity, du Maurier, and Mary Higgins Clark Awards. As an on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV, she's won 37 Emmys and many more journalism honors, and her work has resulted in new laws, criminals sent to prison, homes saved from foreclosure, and millions of dollars in restitution for victims and consumers. A past president of the National Sisters in Crime and founder of the MWA University, her novels include Trust Me, The Murder List, the Charlotte McNally series, which started with Primetime, and the Jane Ryland series, which begins with The Other Woman. She lives in Boston with her husband, a nationally renowned civil rights and criminal defense attorney, and her most recent release is Her Perfect Life. So while Hank and Kathleen are chatting this evening, if you guys have questions for either of them about this new book, previous books, writing process, any of that stuff, please post those in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook, and we will have some time to get to those in a little bit. But for now, Hank, I'm going to turn this over to you, and I will see you guys in just a minute.
Thank you. That's great. Welcome, Kathleen. This, as I keep saying, and as I've told everybody I know, this book is incredible. So are you just soaking up the adulation?
Well, it's always, as you know, as soon as you finish one project, you're usually on to the next one. And it was such a joy, though, to work with these 3 Detective Betty books. It was different than what I had worked on previously. I published 3 works of historical fiction novels, and it came as kind of a surprise. I had written a short story for an anthology and set in Dallas, and I came up with this character, Detective Betty Rizek, who's from New York, and the publisher really liked it. I thought that it was just going to be a one-off, but he thought that there were enough elements of the setting and the approach, the kind of, from the sublime to the ridiculous, that he thought that there was a whole novel there, and what started as just a fun project became a trilogy. So it's just been wonderful to work on Betty.
I mean, we'll talk all about that because I want to hear every single bit of how this happened. And it just shows you, doesn't it, in publishing world, in book world, you never know what's going to happen. Like someday you might wake up on Sunday morning and the New York Times book review features your book in the review section. I gasped when I saw this. And Sarah Weinman, who we adore, loved this book. Did you know that this was good? Do you want my copy of it? I'll send it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. The publisher had sent a list of magazines and newspapers that were considering reviewing the pledge. And as you know, there's so many books published by so many incredible authors that you never know for sure who's going to review it and how it's going to go. So I was over the moon when they sent me the review, because it was just an incredible review. And I was so grateful for that. It was just a nice send off, because this was going to be the last Detective Betty book, at least for a while. And that was just a wonderful surprise.
Well, let me read a tiny little bit in case all of you in the audience didn't get to read this review, but I commend it to you, and go look at it because it was amazing. I'm going to try to do it without my glasses. I'll just read a tiny bit because I want to read a tiny bit later. It says, I read this book in a compulsive binge because it felt physically painful to be away from the story until it was over. And I have to tell you, that is exactly how I felt about it too. This is the ultimate, could not put it down. So you were talking about how you had written Betty in a short story, and the publisher loved it, and she just seemed to bloom. Where did she come from, and why did you make her how she is, this detective who's the main character in your 3 novels about her? And we'll get to all those. How did she come into being? Fully formed, or step by step, or did you learn as you went in the books?
Well, it kind of, in all of my books, the females in the book, the female protagonists, a lot of them fall outside of what's considered proper social decorum. They're kind of outsiders, because I think that's what makes people interesting. And as the adage says, good girls don't make history. So it's usually the troublemaker, the woman that's going kind of pushing against the grain. And I think, before I came to writing relatively late in life, I had lived and worked in New York for 20 years. I worked for 10 years for the chairman of the Commodity Exchange. And then I worked 10 years for the Department of Defense as a contractor in the former Soviet Union. And I did a lot of writing, but it was contract writing. It wasn't the fun, creative stuff. And you may very well relate to this, that those 2 fields, commodity exchange and working in defense contracting, I was often the only woman in the room. it was something that was a constant pressure to make my voice heard and to be recognized for my accomplishments. But there was that constant pressure, that constant headwind that I felt. And I think I brought that when I took an early retirement, moved back to Texas in 2000. My son was about 4.5 at the time, and he had started to school. And I thought, if I'm ever going to start writing, now is the time, because I had some time and space. And I think, I brought that feeling of being kind of an outsider. Although moving back to Texas felt familiar, I had been gone for 20 plus years. And so I did feel like a stranger in a strange land.
Well, talk a little bit about, let's go back then, so here you work for the Defense Department, and you work in finance, and your life is completely different from being a fiction writer. And when you finally decide to start writing, and I didn't start writing till I was 55, so that's like 17 years ago or something, when you got your idea for the first book, it was a historical fiction, not a Betty Rizzi book. Why did that happen?
I had grown up hearing from my mother's side of the family stories about my 9 times great-grandmother named Martha Carrier, who was hanged as a witch in Salem in 1692. And she figured quite prominently during the Salem witch trials, so much so that Cotton Mather called her the Queen of Hell. Not because she could do magic, but because she was so vociferous in her own defense. She was so vocal. And she was, when I asked my grandmother if Martha was really a witch, she said, "Sweetheart, there are no such things as witches, just ferocious women." And I love that idea of ferocious women. And so I grew up with stories. I did a lot of research. So I knew that if I ever got the chance to take the plunge and do right and commit myself to writing full time, that I would, in a novelized form, write about Martha Carrier and her family. And that's what I did. So I was so inspired by her bravery, because she was one of the 19 men and women hanged during the 13-month witch trials. And in every case, if you admitted to being a witch, you might spend some time in prison, but you were ultimately released back into the community. The only people who were hanged, who were executed, were those who refused to admit to being a witch. And it wasn't just as simple as saying, "Yes, I'm a witch, I confess." As with the McCarthy witch scare, the Red Scare trials, you had to give up colleagues, friends, family members. And that was the way it was during the Salem witch trials, which is why Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible, to kind of illuminate that. And I was so inspired by the fact that Martha refused to save herself by admitting to being a witch and pointing the finger at other people, even when 4 of her 5 children were arrested. Her 2 older sons were tortured. So this was this extraordinary woman that I felt compelled to write. And that book kind of launched, my second career. And I don't know if you had the same experience, but, being a professional person, you're used to deadlines, you're used to a certain amount of accountability and productivity. And I thought, well, I'm a competent person. How hard can it be to write a book?
Let me just interrupt you to say, Kathleen, I said those very words to my husband, those very words, when I had the idea for my first book. And my husband says, "Do you know how to write a book?" And I really honestly said, and I quote myself, "How hard can it be?" I've read a million of them. And then we learned, right? Then we learned.
Right. That first book took 5 years to complete, because I was learning the process. Like you, and you were a journalist and you wrote, but it's a different, the reportage of reporting on real life events, just the facts, ma'am type of thing, is very different than creating the long form, the novel, creating an arc and the characters, and it's a wonderful process. But it really it took a long time. It took 5 years to get that first novel produced.
But it was such a success, those 3 novels. And then you were sort of talking about the serendipity of this short story, and talk about ferocious women. Betty Rizek is, the contemporary ferocious woman beyond anything that anybody could ever imagine, except for you. So tell people, if they have not had the utter delight of reading books like The Pledge and The Dime and The Burn, tell a little bit about Betty Rizek, who she is and where she came from. And I always wanted to know where you came up with the name.
We're talking about headwind and this progressive resistance that you put your characters through. And I like to start off my characters behind the 8 ball right from the beginning, because I think it creates that kind of tension that just the character just comes right out of the box, bounding out with a lot of energy. So I thought, okay, how much headwind can I give Betty? So I decided I'm going to set it in Dallas, but I'm going to make her, she was with the New York Police Department. Her father, her uncle, and her brother were all cops, NYPD cops. There was corruption in the police family. She decides very early on that she is going to separate herself from the lineage of corruption that she found herself in at an early age. So she leaves to move to Dallas. And I thought, okay, what can I do to give her, to make her notable from the beginning? So she's a damn Yankee, right? She's from New York. She moves to Texas, joins the Dallas Police Department that, relatively speaking, has a very small percentage of female police officers. Not nearly as many as in Boston or New York or LA. It's improving. A few years ago, we had our first female police chief. So it's changing. But I wanted to put her in this situation that she's from New York, totally different culture. She's Polish. And of course, we all know the Polish jokes. She's nearly 6 feet tall with flaming red hair. And she's lesbian. What could go wrong?
Welcome to Dallas, right? We're all going to embrace you.
So I wanted her to be a force of nature, but I think what's wonderful about writing crime, the crime genre, is that there's so many more women who are being a part of this river, this genre of hard-boiled police procedurals, PIs, investigators who are very competent women. And our competency sometimes encompasses that role of brute force, but oftentimes women solve problems differently. We use our wits, we use our wiles, we use humor. And so I wanted to make Betty very physically formidable, but I wanted to endow her with traits that would allow her to maneuver her way through, push the misogyny of her colleagues, the cultural differences, and be a success using her wits and her wiles. I think in the 3 books, she discharges her gun 1 time, I think.
Well, it's interesting to hear you describe that about Betty, because here she is essentially an Amazon, and she's very smart, but she has her vulnerabilities. I mean, she can be in the most gruesome of situations, and yet she sort of freaks out when a baby is born, and she says this baby looks like a little crime scene because she doesn't even want to look at her. So she's got this wonderful balance of personality, and she's wonderful to strangers, and she adopts a stranger, and she has a loving partner, and she has a big heart, and this book is emotional and gruesome and lovely and riveting, all mixed together. And one of the things that's so impressive about the book, one of many things. We're talking about The Pledge, you all. If you just joined us, we are talking about Kathleen Kent's The Pledge. The first chapter of The Pledge is so gripping and so gorgeous because it, on so many levels, it introduces not only Betty, but the themes of motherhood and teamwork and friendship and spirituality, all those things. And exactly as you said, that Betty is successful because she has a heart and she's smart and she can read people. So
Right.
It starts on September 10th. You don't pull any punches about it.
Right.
Brooklyn, New York, Monday, September 10th, 2001. And the reader knows instantly, like, uh-oh.
Right.
But the people in the book don't know. So that's so chilling. So talk a little bit about that first scene. It's a flashback.
Right.
So talk a little bit about how you crafted that, because that is just a masterclass. And I'm going to stop talking now. That's a masterclass in these chapters.
Thank you, Hank. All three books, the first chapter are flashbacks to earlier in her career. And what I try to do is set the stage for an overarching theme of either corruption or, the suppression or the combating violence. And in the first two books, the men in her life are very important to her. My own father was a very important, nurturing, encouraging element in my growing up. And so you hear a lot about, her brother, her father, her uncle, and Uncle Benny is very important. He plays a part through all three books. He passes away early on in the first book, but she hears his voice. And so you don't really know, is this a supernatural, or is it just her retention of his wisdom and guidance in her head? But he appears to her in moments of stress, and when she runs, she kind of channels his voice. And for the third book, I realized that I'd spent so much time talking about her male colleagues and Benny and her father, and I bring up her mother, but I didn't delve into the totality of her relationship with her mother and what it means. They've rescued a girl in the previous book, a young girl off the streets. Betty is famous through all three books for rescuing street urchins. She does have a soft heart, and she's always trying to give money or rescue people off the streets. So they've rescued this girl named Mary Grace. At the end of the second book, she's pregnant. In the third book, she gives birth in their home and then disappears. So the book, the Pledge, is really about mothers, and it's about what does it mean to be a woman? What are the different aspects of womanhood? You can be a warrior, you can be the nurturer, you can be the wise woman, you can be the tempestuous, maiden figure that, runs into a burning building. There are all of these different aspects of womanhood, and Betty goes through kind of her own arc of maturation. She's at the beginning, she's the kind of person, and I plead guilty to this, that when a parent brings a crying infant onto the airplane, I roll my eyes and think, oh no, oh dear. Or, it's just, we're patient with our own children sometimes, but not so much with other people. And Betty, Betty doesn't want to be a parent, but she does have this very protective side to herself. And so there are all kinds of mothers. There's Mary Grace, the young woman who's unprepared for motherhood. There's Betty's partner, Jackie, who's very nurturing and is kind of the rock steady half of Betty. Then you have Evangeline Roy, who is the villainess in the first.
Don't give that away yet, because I want to get to that. But let me take the readers and the listeners tonight back to chapter 1 of The Pledge to get us into the book, because you were talking about how Betty uses her wits and uses her heart, as well as her police smarts, to solve situations. And she's called to the scene of a murder, a grisly murder, of someone a woman who's apparently killed her husband.
Right.
And she is now suicidal. And they call Betty in to take care of this. And this is someone that she knows.
Right.
So this is September 10th, 2001. Betty enters this gruesome, and how it's described is fabulous, you all. You must read it. And Betty has to handle this situation. Talk a little bit about that situation, because it does bring up friendship and motherhood and partnership, and all those things are all in this first scene. Talk a little bit about that first chapter.
Well, yes, Betty, it's when she's a young police officer. She's in her second year of patrol. An older couple that own a Polish bakery, a famous bakery in Brooklyn. Apparently, an older woman, has murdered her husband, as you say. She's out on the ledge, and her help is enlisted because the male detectives that are there are trying to kind of strong arm her, or they're accepting of the fact that, well, I think we've got a jumper and the net is on the way, but we don't think it's going to arrive in time. So it's sort of a foregone conclusion. And Uncle Benny is there. This is years before he's passed away. And he says, Betty, you know her. See if you can talk her off the ledge. So she crawls out on the ledge and she has this conversation with Mrs. Janovich, who's the older lady that owns the bakery. And the gist of it was that what you understand is that she has a granddaughter, and that granddaughter, she has found out, is being molested by her grandfather. And so this loving, kind, nurturing woman does this unspeakable act. And it kind of, it brings forth at the very beginning of, people will go to many lengths to save their loved ones, men and women. And Betty she tries different, tries different ways to talk her back in. And finally, it looks like the woman's going to jump off the ledge. And she goes, wait a minute, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten today.
She says to Betty, why don't you just jump with me? And Betty says, are we giving too much away? I don't think we are.
No. I think it's important as a setup that she, and then later on, Benny, when Betty is talking to Benny and saying, wow, I was afraid that was going to end really badly. He says to her, Betty, you instinctively know what people need and what they want. And if you tap into that, you can't go wrong, and that's part of her nurturing side, is that she instinctively knows what people need.
Because the woman who was about to jump, this is so cinematic, Kathleen. So these two women on the ledge, and one of them is about to jump because she's so full of remorse about how she's killed her husband for this secret, ugly secret. And she says to Betty, why don't you just come with me? And Betty says, okay, but can you get me something to eat first? And this woman is, she has a bakery, a restaurant. And so she's a mom, she's nurturing too. And they go in, and I just burst into tears because that is such a moment of allowing us to know who Betty is. And then at the end of chapter one, of course, Benny says what? Do you want me to read it, or do you want to say it?
No, you can read it. I'd love for you to read it.
Okay. So Betty has saved this woman, saved the day because of her heart. She loves Uncle Benny. He's a good guy and is her sort of spiritual guide, and will continue to be so. And he says, I'll always look after you, he said. Listen, drink up and get some sleep tonight. Tomorrow will be a better day. He finished the last of his second shot of Jameson. Here's to September 11th. The sun will rise, the buildings will stand, and we, Officer Rizek, will always have a job to do. And you just, I think, who can write that? Who could write that? Because I just got chills reading it, because we know what happened. And it shows you've written these two women on the precipice, on the ledge, and then you leave the world on the ledge. The world is on the edge, on the ledge, on the night of September 10th. We just didn't know it.
Right.
And you bring up the fragility of our lives and how everything is based on something else that we can't even know. I mean, it was amazing. And then fast forward, chapter 2 is Dallas. So why did you do that? Why did you move to Dallas?
Well, since the first 2 books had established her and Betty and Jackie already in Dallas, I wanted to kind of fast forward to September the 11th, but several years later, you know, when I lived in New York for many years, I lived in Battery Park City, which was literally across the street from the World Trade Center. We had every Christmas party for many years at Windows on the World. My son took his first steps in the atrium of the World Trade Center. And I moved the year before, but it had such a visceral effect on me that for years I dreamt about it, and it was just this monumental event. And I think what was important to me was, as you said, to bring up that the adage, man plans and God laughs, that we can't plan for things. We don't know what's going to happen, and we can't control. There's only so much that we can control. And yet when tragedy strikes, when disaster strikes, we still have a job to do. We still have other people to take care of. And so Betty has to, and very quickly, even it starts on 9/11, you find out that this baby has been left with Jackie and Betty. Mary Grace is gone, and very quickly 2 former villains in the first 2 books show up together. And so there's this conflict, but it's also ephemeral. You know, there's nothing guaranteed. And I think that kind of tenuousness is so great, building tension in a book, because it builds tension in the reader. And it's just a great way to kind of, you know, you built your house on quicksand, and you never know when that house is going to fall down.
And Betty, though, in The Pledge, is a police officer. She's a sergeant now in Dallas, and she has to be in control. She has to take control. And the voice of Uncle Benny, calms her and quiets her and connects her to something bigger than her personal self and bigger than life, actually. And she is facing a ticking clock. Talk about the 2 characters, and Kathleen, you are diabolical. Talk about the 2 characters who are the bad guys, or the baddest of the bad guys in this book.
It's funny because for my first 3 works of historical fiction, I did many book clubs, and a lot of them in and around Dallas. And a lot of them were more genteel, ladies who lunch. And when they first read The Dime, I showed up to one of the book club talks, and one of the older ladies said, honey, you sing so nice, but this book is just so violent.
I was going to say that. I mean, you do seem so nice. And I am, and I don't want to say gruesome, but part of the tension of the way that you write violence is what is left unsaid, what is left imagined. I mean, what's on the page is pretty scary, but what's imagined, and what Betty imagines, not necessarily what happens, but what she imagines. And that's even scarier, if anything could be scarier, than what you set up. So tell about the 2 perpetrators of this violence.
Well, in the first book, The Dime, I decided I needed a villain, and I decided to have a female villain who was homegrown. And she's kind of based not on any one person, but in East Texas, behind the, what they call the pine curtain, methamphetamine was of epidemic proportion. It was probably the biggest drug problem in East Texas. So I developed a woman she has a cult, which, of followers that's called The Family, kind of named after Manson's The Family. But she sells methamphetamine to get money to build her quote unquote church. And so she's kind of like a Cruella figure with red hair, and she's truly insane. And she has two sons whom she loves, and they're criminals as well. So I took a lot of real life parameters of the meth trade, and they use biker gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood to distribute it. And I just wanted to make her, really dastardly and really almost like a Disney villain almost. So Betty tangles with her, and no spoilers, a lot of conflict occurs, and then Evangeline disappears. And then in the second book, The Burn, because she's a narcotics detective, she comes face to face or rubs up against a Sinaloan cartel enforcer named El Cuchillo, or the knife. And there's plenty of news stories and anecdotal tales about Mexican cartels. And they have really, as we know, they have really made inroads into Texas. And as it turns out, they have taken over the meth trade it's not homegrown anymore. They've been edged out by the cartels. So it caused friction. So then in the third book, El Cuchillo tells Betty she has 2 weeks to get rid of his competition. And that turns out to be Evangeline Roy. Otherwise, he's going to come after Betty's family. So she's on the clock for 2 weeks to track down and apprehend or kill Evangeline Roy. So I've kind of brought them together for this last hurrah.
Talk about a mano battle. This is in The Pledge by Kathleen Kent that we're talking about. So you put poor Betty, who can stand up for herself, between the two worst possible people that anybody on the planet could ever possibly imagine. There's a tiny little bit here where you describe when Evangeline Roy meets Betty at one point. She says, Evangeline Roy stands primly against the far wall, holding a gun in one hand, which is pointed at me. Somehow she's gotten past 2 patrol cars and my home security alarm, almost as though she passed through brick and mortar like a specter. Her eyes, 2 burnt holes in a pale blanket. She smiles, showing as much warmth as a plague mask. I mean, this is not somebody you want to be involved in. But so you make her a mother.
Right.
A real mother with a baby mother. You make her a mother. And Betty is learning about motherhood as well, and the wrath, the passion of motherhood, and rage and anger.
Right. Yeah, and that's why the dedication in the front is a quote from Medea, and it's, "How does it feel with my teeth in your heart?" And we know, of course, that Medea would not win Mother of the Year because she kills and eats her own children. So, but there's something epic about the expectation of a mother being all nurturing and all loving and all embracing, when history is filled with mothers who are cold and hard and vengeful. And Evangeline Roy blames Betty for deaths in her own family. So she is filled to the brim with vengeance. That's what drives her. That's her motivating factor. When El Cuchillo is a psychopath, he's a killer, but he's driven more by pragmatic greed than personal vengeance. It's sort of, he's a little more dispassionate about it in some ways. So it was, and then putting Betty. And then the baby goes missing. So Mary Grace is gone. The baby seems to have been abducted. And so Betty has to fight being unseated by her worry for this baby, because despite her best efforts, she really comes to love the baby and wants to be her protector.
So you have this theme throughout, no matter what element of Betty's life you're talking about, whether it's her relationship with Jackie and the baby, or whether it's El Cuchillo and Evangeline Roy, or the police department. It's about, what does it mean to be a family? What is a family, for better
Right.
or worse? And what are those connections? And what do we owe a family? And also, what does it mean to be a partner or a team, on a team? Talk about those kinds of relationships a little bit, and how many of them there are in the book, because your secondary characters are amazing. The informant and the detectives, and everybody is just completely gorgeously.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun with the pledge too, because I brought in 2 private investigators, Peg Bartles and Rocky Bentner, who are, you would think that they ran away and joined a circus. I mean, they are real characters, and I had a lot of fun with them because they help Betty kind of tangentially in trying to track down Mary Grace and the baby. She has her main partner, Seth, who she's very close to. She's just been made sergeant. So that's changed some of the internal dynamics, because now she's the team leader as opposed to just one of the grunts. She's a little bit elevated, and she's worried how that's going to be perceived. And there are 2 new detectives that I've added on because we had some carnage in the previous books, so I had to replenish the ranks, so to speak. So she really comes into direct conflict with one of the new imports, who's a tough guy detective originally from Chicago, and they really butt heads. But it is about trust and teamwork, and her learning to embrace her own power as sergeant, and step up to that elevated position.
And I have to tell you all, we're talking about the pledge. I have to tell you all that and those relationships and in those dialogues, your flair for conversation and your flair for dialogue is hilarious. I mean, this book is very dark and incredibly tense, but the scenes where there's banter are great. I mean, just completely great. So you have Betty and her partner Jackie. You have the young woman that they took in, who has a baby that's missing, and then you have drug wars on the other side. There's a lot going on in this book, and it is so much fun to read. I insist that you could read this book first, and it would still be great. They're standalones, don't you think?
Yeah, it was written, as a trilogy, but I wrote it so that it could be a standalone book, that it refers back to some previous characters and some previous events. I try to shade it in so that the reader's not coming in cold and not knowing what's going on. But it's definitely can be a standalone book for sure. And it was really, that's a challenge. I had to learn. I mean, you've written series. You've written, that looking at the long arc of stories that will take place maybe years down the road. I had only written standalone books, so it was a real challenge to learn how to foreshadow or reach back and draw older characters or former events and kind of thread it into the weave of the pledge. So that was a challenge for me.
I read the pledge first. I will confess, and there was nothing that I didn't get, and everything that I understood, and all it made me want to do was read the others, which I'm about to do. Did you plan it all though? Did you know what was going to happen and then do 1, 2, 3?
Kind of. I had it pretty well plotted out, book 1 and 2. And a lot of it changed. The treatments changed quite a bit as the characters evolved. But it wasn't until I was almost finished with the second book that I started thinking about the pledge. And I was kind of at sea for a while, figuring out what I was going to do other than bringing the 2 villains together. And I think what really the breakthrough moment was when I decided to look at this issue of, you know, what does it mean to the aspects of womanhood, as opposed to, you know, I concentrated on Betty's struggles within a male-dominated, you know, institution. And that really, it kind of flowed after that. When I looked at it through that lens, it really opened it up for me and allowed me to kind of develop the story more fully.
It's so fun to hear that, the idea that you sort of realized what you had already written and what that meant without actually grasping it completely. Your books revealed, the story revealed itself to you because Betty is so real.
Well, thank you. And I love that I love that you appreciated the humor of it, because it is a lot of dark subjects are, you know, investigated during the 3 books, but there's part of the thing that I love about Betty is that she's very self-deprecating. When she's an ass, she admits that she's an ass. She knows that she's got weaknesses and foibles, and she can kind of make fun of herself and allow other people to make fun of herself. And a lot of the research that I did, I have a first cousin, who I grew up with that I'm very close with, and he was a 32-year police veteran.
That was my next question, because how did you do that?
Right. And, you know, he growing up and all through our, you know, family reunions, he never really talked about his work. And I knew that he did vice undercover. He did narcotics undercover. He was the youngest officer in charge on the Plano SWAT team. You know, I mean, he was this guy was a tough guy, but he is so. He's got a great sense of humor. He's really gentle and kind. He's generous to a fault. And what the amazing thing was that he kept it so separate from his family life. And it wasn't until that he agreed to let me pick his brain and help me do research on these books, that it opened up a whole world of danger and it really is a closed society. It's paramilitary, and it's, you know, it's us and them, the rest of the civilians. But he was very candid, and through him, I started meeting other police officers and detectives who were retired. And once they've retired, they're not bound by confidentiality, and they can talk more about the cases. And one of my favorite sources was a woman named Marilyn Hay, who was the first woman to get her detective shield in Dallas in the mid '80s. Oh. And she had started the academy in 1977. She was one of 3 women, and she was the only one left standing at graduation. They made it so difficult for the women. And the stories that she told were, you know, bordered on the criminal, the things that they did to try to get her to resign. And she stuck it out for over 30 years. And so there are several stories that, you know, that I reference, you know, part of Betty's past, that are actually Marilyn's story. And Marilyn was very funny. And she said that was the thing, you know, especially if you're working homicide or you're working narcotics, you have to have a sense of humor. Now, it may be gallows humor, but it breaks the tension. And she said it keeps your sanity. And I tried to filter that through Betty as well, to break up the tension of what was going on.
Well, it's as I was reading it, I kept thinking, she really knows her stuff. This is so genuine and so authentic, about the police and about undercover operations, about motherhood, about how women feel, if there's a way that women feel. It's just marvelous. The scene where Betty forgets that she can't go running because the baby is in the other room. She's going to leave the baby behind, you know, and whose brain hasn't collapsed at one point. I know we're madly running out of time. So let me just read you one more thing from this incredible review in the Sunday Times, because I have to know the answer to this. She says, the fabulous Sarah Wyman says, Betty Rizek won't soon be forgotten by crime readers, but after a trilogy's worth of trauma and violence, she deserves to rest and heal from the hardships her creator put her through. So I agree that she deserves to rest and heal, but really, this is the end?
The vagaries of publishing. I put a comma at the end of that trilogy, not a period, because I would love to revisit. And I hope that if I can come up with a great new story for Betty, that I would love to return to her. I'm now working, I'm almost finished with a book. It's a spy novel, and it's based very loosely on some of my experiences in the former Soviet Union when I started traveling there in the early 90s. So I'm pivoting. I'm working on that, but who knows? I would love to revisit Betty because I just love her. And what made me happy, one of the things that made me happy about the Weinman review was that it felt like she really commiserated with Betty, and Betty really touched her. And she was saying, give her a break, let her rest a little bit, because you've put her through the ringer.
You definitely did in The Fledge. And I can tell you all that if you have not read the first two books, run right out and do that. But you can read this one right now. You can get it at Murder by the Book. And I urge you to do that. And Kathleen, as we call John back in to see if there are questions from the audience, if you write a spy thriller, I will read that too. I am a huge fan. I will read anything that you write. So if Betty can bring on the new characters, that is wonderful.
Perfect. So we do have some questions, but before we get into those, Hank, you've been so wonderful to lead the discussion for us tonight. Can you tell everybody a little bit about your most recent release, Her Perfect Life?
My book, Her Perfect Life, was just so casually displayed behind me. Let me see if I have a copy of it right here. Her Perfect Life. Okay, came out a couple of weeks ago, a month ago now. I guess time goes by so crazily now, with starred reviews from Kirkus and from Publishers Weekly. So that is marvelous. In 5 words, Her Perfect Life is sisters, betrayal, guilt, fame, and revenge. So it's sort of, if in five phrases, Her Perfect Life is a beloved reporter with a deep, dark secret, a missing college student, and that is not the secret, an anonymous source, a clandestine, passionate weekend in Aspen, and a child's little pink suitcase, which is surprisingly empty. So Her Perfect Life stars Lily Atwood, who's a beloved television reporter in Boston, so beloved that her fans have given her a hashtag Perfect Lily, hashtag Perfect Lily. And she has a deep, dark secret. So she has everything. She has fame, she has fortune, she has Emmys. She's the single mother, talking about motherhood. She's the single mother to an adorable 7-year-old daughter. But as I said, she has this deep, dark secret, and everybody knows Lily Atwood. And that is her biggest problem, because if this secret gets revealed, then her life is over, her career is over, everything she's ever worked for and everyone she's ever loved will be taken away from her. So it's 2 smart women facing off in a high-stakes psychological cat and mouse game to prove their truth about a devastating childhood betrayal. But which woman is the cat and which woman is the mouse? And that is Her Perfect Life.
Perfect. So as I mentioned when we got started, Hank did a really great chat with Robin Harding when her book came out as well. So I've dropped a link to that in the comments. So if you want to check that out and hear a little bit more about that, that's there. So first up question, this one's for you, Kathleen. So we were so excited to hear that you were writing these detective novels set in Dallas, because Texas seems to be this unmined treasure trove of it's just rife for crime fiction. Why do you think we don't see more kind of Texas crime fiction?
Well, I think that's going to change, because there's a whole new crop of wonderful Texas writers who are setting their stories in and around the South. And the reason, coming back to Dallas, it was very familiar to me because I grew up here as a child, but it had changed so much. And I love the idea of contrast. when you think about the classic crime stories, you think of New York, Boston, Chicago, LA, and not Dallas so much. And yet, you know, Dallas is a very pretty city. It's very wealthy. It has, you know, it's a very prosperous place. But contingent with that, you've got the dark underbelly of sex trafficking, drugs, gangs. You don't read about it that much because it doesn't often make the first page of the Dallas Morning News, but it's there. And I thought that tension between this beautiful facade and yet this dark underbelly would make a great scene. And I just think there's just so much to Dallas that offers, you know, there's kind of, it's still, some of it's the Old West, and yet it's a very metropolitan city with museums and galleries and that type of thing. So I just thought it was a very rich, fertile place to build a series on.
Yeah, perfect. So Susan wants to know, are any of your characters, Betty in particular, based on anyone you know?
As I was discussing with Hank a little while ago, there was a retired female police detective that I spoke to, and I channeled some of her stories into the character of Betty. You know, a lot of the dialogue I got was, you know, when my son was little and I was driving carpool, and I drove carpool a lot, and I drive for a lot of kids. The fascinating thing is, if you just drive and let them play their music and you don't say anything, they forget you're there and they start talking amongst themselves. And it's amazing what you can find out by just, you know, keeping your ear open. I went to quite a few police retirement parties where a lot of Jameson was served. And I would sit in the corner and just listen. And after a while, they forget I was there and they'd start telling stories. And so some of these absurd events that happened that I put in the book were things that I overheard that weren't told to me intentionally. And of course, I would change the names and the dates and the places to protect the guilty. But I just sat there and just like a sponge, just absorbed the dynamics between the officers and the way they talk to each other and their sense of humor.
How about you, Hank?
I was thinking about what Kathleen was saying. I did a story with a police department in a state that I will not name, in a city that I will not name, in a time that I will not name. And as a gift, after I did the story, they gave me a T-shirt that they handed out among themselves. And the T-shirt from this police department said, "Deny everything." Is that not great? I wear it all the time. I think it's interesting because, and Susan, I want to say that we can't see the chat. So Kathleen, I keep calling you Betty. Kathleen and I don't know who's here. So if we haven't acknowledged you, it means we don't know who you are. So thank you so much, all of you, for coming, and Novel Suspects for inviting us. It's interesting to think of people in our books, in mine at least, are just fictional. They're fictional. You know, there may be a phrase that someone says or an attitude that someone has, but it's really part of the magic, I think, that although we have all these experiences, when they go in our brains as real and they come out altered and changed like a Rubik's Cube of chick, 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 chick. And it's not reality translated into fiction. It's experience morphed into a new world. It's a completely new world for me.
Right. Hank, I loved, and I think your book, Her Perfect Life, illuminated and illustrated the double-edged sword that social media has. You know, we depend so, especially public figures, depend so deeply on their public persona, you know, on the public face. And it's very carefully orchestrated and it's very carefully manipulated. But that double-edged sword is that how the mighty are fallen. And it was that not just the mystery that you talked about, but that constant tension of perfect Lily having to stay perfect, that, you know, that tension. And I wanted to ask you if, you know, I'm an older person and I had to learn about social media in promoting books. How have you, do you have a comfortable relationship with social media? How do you negotiate that?
Oh, thank you. I think because I've been a television reporter for 43 years. So I have been dealing with editing and video and voice and performance and public speaking and sort of extemporaneous speaking and those kinds of things. So I'm not intimidated by video or writing a script or writing a promo. Think about that. Writing a tease, writing a promo, writing a headline, writing a description. All those kinds of things are what I've been doing for all this time. You know, if social media called for someone who could write a contract for the Defense Department, you'd be overjoyed with that. So social media sort of draws on all the things that I've always done. So I'm pretty comfortable about it. I've never made a Reels and I've never made a TikTok. That may be to me. So if any of you who are watching tonight want to teach us how to do it, Kathleen and I are here to learn how to do it. But the story you're right is about the spotlight and this sort of relentless spotlight. I've had people say to me, you know, I've never seen a bad picture of you on TV. And I say, yeah, because I'm choosing all the pictures. The bad ones are on the cutting room floor.
Right.
We had a customer come in one day, very well-meaning, and say like, "Oh, you guys need a TikTok," and we're like, "No, I don't." I feel like I'm fairly well versed in social media. I'm like, I don't have the brain power to learn it, and I don't have the time. Like, I still have to sell books. I don't know how to put together a TikTok and be able to not take forever to do it. As you sit there, sometimes like taking like 30 minutes to pose like one photo that you're going to put up, and like people are going to scroll through so fast.
Exactly.
Right.
The three of us maybe should have some sort of a tutorial from somewhere someday.
So Lauren from Novel Suspects wants to know, and here's my disclaimer though, you can't mention each other's books, but what is something that you've read lately that you loved? Let's start with Kathleen.
Oh, okay. So I was in Crested Butte, Murder in the Mountains conference, which was a lot of fun, a beautiful setting. And I met some wonderful writers, but I read a book called Winter Counts by David Heska Wembley. I think it's a long last name, but he is indigenous. He is Lakota, and he grew up on reservation. And his story it's a novel, but it's a beautifully written, heart-rending and pulse-pounding novel about an indigenous man who is kind of a hired revenge seeker. I didn't know that people on a reservation, that Native Americans could not own the land that they live on the reservation. They have to lease that land. And the federal government won't get involved with anything short of murder. So anything like a sexual assault or, theft, they'll hire these people, these men usually, to go and exact vengeance on them. And so Virgil Wounded Horse is such a person, and it's a beautiful novel. It's called Winter Counts.
Yes, I totally agree with you. That is he is David Heska Wembley Wyden is such a great guy. He's just
he is
brilliant guy.
Yeah.
And are you finished? Do you have more?
Yeah. No. That was it.
No, I love to hear your recommendations. Quickly, Wanda Morris, All Her Little Secrets. Wanda Morris is a wonderful debut author from Atlanta who has written this sort of psychological legal thriller. It doesn't take place in court, but it's really terrific. Sort of dual timelines in 1979 and in the present about a young woman who is making her way through the corporate world, a young lawyer. All her Little Secrets by Wanda Morris. Also, Amanda Jayatissa. You know Amanda Jayatissa, you all, is amazing. So she's from Sri Lanka, and she wrote the creepiest. She's up there, Kathleen, with you with creepiness in a good way. She wrote a book.
What's the name of the book? What's the name of the book?
Called My Sweet Girl. My Sweet Girl by Amanda Jayatissa, and it's chilling. It is unlike anything you've ever read about a little girl who was adopted from Sri Lanka and lives in San Francisco, and it's amazing. And my final one is, I just interviewed Anthony Horowitz, who is just now my complete idol, who wrote a line to Kill, which is the funniest, cleverest, most meta, super meta mystery that I have ever read, and it's amazing. So I love all three books, and Winter Counts as well.
Yeah,
we're really lucky. We've partnered with the Crime Writers of Color, and we've been hosting it every other month. It started because when BoucherCon got canceled, they were going to do an underrepresented voices in crime fiction reception, and they weren't able to do it. So we were able to get with them and do kind of a virtual version of it. And they got Wanda Morris and David Heskell-Wombley-Wyden to read portions of it. So if you guys have not checked out that event on the store's,
can I also make a plug? Sean Cosby, Blacktop Wasteland, and Razorblade Tears. Yeah. He is a brilliant writer. I love his books. Razorblade Tears, I think, is the most recent.
Yeah, which we still have a handful of signed copies of. And our next, so we're doing an every other month series with the Crime Writers of Color. So the next one that we're going to be doing is on December 16th, and they're going to kind of recap some of their favorite books of the year. So if you guys haven't tuned in, it's great. It's Kelly Garrett and Alex Segura, who are fantastic. They host, and it's sort of like we get to like just sit back and watch their little TV show as they interview authors and chat. So it's so much fun. So I think that's going to about do it for us tonight. But before we go, Kathleen, you mentioned that you were working on a spy novel. Hank, what are you got coming up next?
I would love to tell you all, this is breaking news, that yesterday I hit send on the first draft of my new novel. So this
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so pleased about it. You see my grin. There is nothing better than crossing off write book from your to-do list. So it doesn't have a title. I don't have, it's still going to be edited, but that's all right. I love the editing process. So you all will be the first to know when something is settled, but it will be out in January of whatever the next year is.
Great.
So I'm very excited about it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That'll be book 14.
Book 14?
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So to recap for anybody who might have joined us late, we have been chatting with Hank Phillippi Ryan and Kathleen Kent. Kathleen's newest book, The Pledge, just came out on Tuesday. It's the third in the Detective Betty series. And Hank's most recent book, Her Perfect Life, came out in September. We've got copies of both of them in the store. So I hope that you will visit us either online or come visit us in person and pick up copies. If you missed any part of our chat, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive it so you can go back and rewatch it. While you're there, we'll hope that you'll surf around and check out the other virtual events that we've done. Also wanted to send a huge thank you to Lauren with Novel Suspects for helping co-host tonight and help put this all together. Hank, thank you so much for leading the conversation. It's always so great to just kind of sit back and hand the reins over to you. You do such a wonderful job. And Kathleen, it was so great to see you again.
Thank you, John. Thank you. This has been wonderful. And Hank, thank you so much for all your support and your wonderful interview tonight. I'm very grateful.
Well, I can't wait to meet you in person. Thank you for this.
It will happen. It will definitely happen.
Y'all have a good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.